Our culture struggles with sexuality. And notice I'm using the word sexuality as opposed to sex. At a certain point, I'll also use the word sex. They're partly the same and partly not the same. But all cultures struggle with sexuality, and all cultures struggle with sex. Our culture does, and struggles with it massively. And our churches struggle with it massively. I think, without trying to criticize the church or any churches, to say that our church has never attained a very healthy, wholesome, spirituality and theology of sex, that's not a big secret. It hasn't. But the consolation is nobody else has either. See, sometimes the church gets criticized and people say, my God, we're uptight and we're this and we're that, all of which is true. But what's the alternative? We're probably the best of a very bad lot, It's true because you look at secular cultures, look at highly secularized cultures today, Sweden, Holland, post-Christian cultures and so on. Everybody's massively struggling with sex. Or in Asian cultures or Buddhist cultures or Hindu cultures, or Islamic cultures, it's not like somebody's got the formula. Somebody's achieved this and the rest of us are somehow missing out. It is just a huge struggle and always has been. So that, and we're going to suggest reasons for that. One of them is that sexuality is a power that's a little bit beyond us. It's a little bit beyond us. And that's why all cultures since forever, if I can coin an expression like that, all cultures struggle with sexuality. Sometimes worse than other times. But today I'm going to suggest in Western culture, there's a massive struggle with understanding sexuality and the amount of just, sexual dysfunction and sexual violence and sexual schizophrenia and just sexual unhappiness in our culture is huge, except, it's true all over. So let's look at that. I want to begin by talking about the power of sexuality. The first thing you need to say about sexuality in terms of its anthropology and so on is that it is simply the most powerful force on the planet. Sometimes there's a lot of denial about that, especially inside the churches and so on. Say, well, it's not that big a deal. No, it's a real big deal. Plato says we are fired into life with a madness that comes from the gods. And this madness would have us believe that we can have a great love, a cosmic embrace, that we can perpetuate our own seed, and that we can contemplate the divine. It's a magnificent statement. But notice what he says, we're fired into life. Notice the verb. He doesn't say we wake up serenely in our cribs, contemplatively survey our options. No. We wake up on fire, and part of that deep fire, the deep eros in us, which I want to say later on, is more than just sex. But sex is a deep and a vital part of it, And the universe itself is sexed at every level. Sex begins with the neutrons and the protons. The molecules are sexed. Hydrogen and oxygen, they get it on together. And at every level, you have this powerful coming together of elements. Male, female, positive, negative charge, and so on. So that it's what creates life. It's what creates everything. It's the deep energy underlying everything. And later on I'm going to tell you, it's also the deep energy inside of God. God is powerfully sexed, okay? And part of our struggle with sex is we've never been able to put sex into God. and we have to, because all of the universe, from the neutrons, the protons, the atoms, up to human beings, are powerfully sexed. And sex, in that sense, is what drives this planet. It drives everything. It's a principle of all of life. As Plato said, we're fired into life with this powerful fire. And the first thing I want to highlight is, we'll put it in anthropological terms right now. Later we'll put it more spiritually. It's divine fire. This is sacred fire. So sex is a great fire, and we know that. But it's divine fire. It's powerful fire. It's good fire. Now, one last thing about the power of this fire. It's powerful fire, but it's powerful fire in two ways. As I'm going to say today often, it can't be said often enough. We can't often enough affirm the goodness and the sacredness of sexuality. Sexuality isn't a dirty thing, a secular thing, an anti-God thing. Sexuality comes directly from God. It's a powerful fire, but because it's so powerful in two ways. It's the greatest force for peace, love, happiness, creativity on earth. And it's the cause of most of the ecstasies on this planet. But it's also the greatest power for violence and destruction and schizophrenia, and it causes most of the murders and suicides on this planet as well. See, it's this powerful fire. And partly it's a little beyond us, and so it's a power for good, and it's a power for evil, it's a power for negativity. Quite simply said, and each of us in our lives, to the degree that we are integrated or unintegrated sexually, we're going to be happy or unhappy. If I have a certain essential sexual integration, I'm going to have an essential happiness, and vice versa. If I lack essential sexual integration, I'm going to lack happiness in this life. Okay, so it's the greatest power inside of us. It's the greatest power even cosmically and physically on the planet. But because it's so powerful, it's a power for good, it's a power for ecstasy, and it's a power for destruction. It's a power for murder, for suicide.